Good evening and welcome into the Press Pros Huddle Show. I'm Bruce Hooley. That gentleman beside me is Sonny Fulks, and we are here to talk about the state semifinal pairings in all 7 divisions as we work toward the state football championships next weekend, the first weekend in December at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. We also have a little college football action to talk about with Ohio State and Michigan playing on Saturday, and both the Buckeyes and the Flyers are in holiday basketball tournaments. Buckeyes play tonight at 9 o'clock, and the Flyers debut tomorrow in the Bad Boy Mowers tournament. So, Mr. Folks, welcome in. We still have a lot of teams in the Press Pros area in it. We could have an all Press Pros Division I final since we're going to adopt Springfield, since Bryce Schondelmeyer used to play at Arcanum, and we'll be covering Springfield and their semifinal matchup this Saturday. No, that's Friday night. Division I is Moeller and Springfield at Pickwa's Alexander Stadium.
Well, this goes back to like 2014 when we had the three. I think it was 2014, and when we had the three MAC teams win the state title, and then people were asking me this week about, is this the most teams that you've ever had in that Press Pros has ever covered at the state tournament? Well, in a manner of speaking, because as you talk about Tip City, it's the most leagues that we stand to have covered.
Yeah.
Those 3 teams are all from the Midwest Athletic Conference. Now you're talking about a couple of teams, that being New Bremen and Marion Local, that are MAC members that could be there if they get through this weekend. Certainly Tippecanoe, and to all those people who write to me and say it's Tippecanoe, it's not Tip City. It's Tippecanoe High School, it's not Tip City. I say to you, old habits die hard, and I'm an old habit guy. So if they get through, that's a second league. And of course, if, as you just mentioned, if Springfield gets through, that's a GWAC, Greater Western Ohio team, conference team, if they get through. And that's a great story with Bryce Schondelmeyer. We'll talk about that. But it's the most leagues. It's not necessarily the most teams, but it is the most leagues, and it's exciting. And I don't know that I've in 13 years I've been doing this, I can't ever remember as much enthusiasm and as much conversation. Now, we're doing this on a Monday, of course.
Yep.
And I've been out of town the weekend. And by the way, thank you to you and Gibby and
Julie
Lee Woolery and Julie McMacken-Wright for holding down the fort on Friday and Saturday night. Fantastic coverage. The photos are great. The stories, the writing was Pulitzer quality. So thank you for filling in for me while I was gone for a couple of days, but I can't ever remember this much excitement or conversation about, especially Bruce, the state semifinal round of the tournament.
Yeah, and we add another league, of course, with our coverage of Central Ohio. We have Gahanna-Lincoln out of the OCC. The Lions are 13-1, and that's pretty common in Division I, as every one of the 4 semifinalists has 1 loss. Springfield is 12-1. They play 13-1 Moeller. And then the other semifinal, that one's at Arlen Field in Mansfield. Our Steve Blackledge will be covering that Friday night. The defending state champion, Lakewood St. Ed, taking on Gahanna-Lincoln, both of those with 1 loss. So really outstanding football out there. Tippecanoe played an amazing game on Friday night and knocked off the number 1 team in the state of Ohio in Division III, Hamilton-Baden, the defending state runner-up. They lost to Chardon last year. Chardon was still in it until Friday night. They got knocked out, so there will be a new champion in Division III. And the way the Tippecanoe Red Devils are playing, I would not doubt them, because they've taken out second-seeded Western Brown and top-seeded Hamilton-Baden in back-to-back weeks.
Well, you know what you have to have, and I've 6 times at least today, somebody's either called, texted, or asked me, hey, how far can Tip go? Nobody knows except Tip himself. And at this particular point, you've seen all the wing tees, you've seen all the RPOs, you've seen all the spreads, you've seen the full house, you've seen probably somebody out there is still running the sprint draw offense. So you've seen everything that's out there that typical high school teams are going to do. At this point, it's about confidence and how well you recognize and how well you're going to be able to execute against whatever you see. Now, you've seen it all. But how well the confidence that you have in yourself. And I don't know that there's a better story about confidence than what Tip represents right now, because as I said to somebody earlier today, Matt Burbacher and his staff have done a superb job. And I know you've covered them now for almost 3 weeks in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that those guys have done such a good job of convincing those kids, we put you in a position where you can be successful. Now just go out and respond to what you see. And that's what they're doing. They're playing fearlessly. They're making the big play. Some of them, you and I talked earlier today, making it for the first time. Some people are making it, are becoming accustomed to making that play. So it's confidence begets confidence at this point, and certainly nobody's doing it better than the Red Devils are.
Yeah, and when you look back on the last 3 weeks that I've had them against Trotwood, Western Brown, and Hamilton Baden, the thing that stands out to me is, as you mentioned, the number of guys who make consequential plays at the exact time in the game where they have to have it. You would think their top offensive threats are, of course, Liam Peronsky. He's one of their 3 returning starters. Xavier Jones, Stanley Klein. If they're going to make a play on offense, it's one of those 3 guys. Well, we saw Lucas Mary had a big game on Saturday night with 2 huge kickoff returns and a touchdown catch. And Evan Liette, who missed the Western Brown game with an ankle injury that he suffered in the Trotwood win, he had 2 amazing catches. They were high-quality catches, and at very opportune times. You flip over to the defense. Of course, Josh Dietz is their leader. He's another one of their returning starters. And yet they had Carson Robbins and a couple other guys who made big plays. They were outstanding on special teams. They were clearly the better team than Western Brown on special teams, and they had a huge special teams advantage against Baden because Jackson Cleather came out, hit a 43-yard field goal into the wind with plenty to spare on the first possession after Lucas Mary's 65-yard kickoff return. And then Baden in the second quarter was going in the same direction and barely nosed a 30-yard field goal over the crossbar. And I thought, wow, if this comes down to the end, Tip's going to be in good shape with Jackson Cleather kicking a field goal. But, of course, Tip didn't need a long field goal at the end. They got Jackson Cleather from the 6-yard line, which they were at the 1, and they took the penalty to move him back to the 6. And that shows the confidence that Matt Burbacher has in Jackson Cleather to put the game on his right foot. You can say, well, it's a 24-yard field goal on a night as cold as that was. A lot of things can go wrong with snap and hold, and kickers can kick it sideways. We've seen it in the NFL happen, and Jackson Cleather is money kicking the football. So a big win by Tip, and now they take on Bloom Carroll Friday night. Bloom Carroll's 13-1. They moved up from Division 4 last year. They're 13-1. The thing that I've noticed about Bloom Carroll over the years is they're good at everything. They're good at baseball. They're good at football. They're good at basketball. They're good at basketball. They're good at girls soccer. They're good at boys soccer. I mean, they got some athletes down there south of Columbus in the Bloom Carroll system, and I'm sure they're, not scared of Tip, nor would I be if I were Bloom Carroll, because I see teams go up and down the field on Tip in the first quarter, but boy, they shut you down after that. They do what they have to do to win the game. So I'm looking forward to being at that game Friday night at London High School.
Well, nothing about Lucas Mary. I've never heard that name before last week. And to illustrate your point exactly, what a great story for that young man to step up, make those 2 particular plays that you
and caught a touchdown pass and caught a touchdown
pass as well. And then, I'm reading your game story in over on the East Coast on Saturday morning, and I went back and looked at that paragraph a second time, trying to figure out who Lucas Mary was, because I've only seen them once this year, and he didn't stand out on that particular night. But again, to make your point, they've got different kids stay up all the time.
Yeah,
who are coming through for them, and again, it just illustrates when you get a culture going, as Matt has done there in a very short amount of time. You can certainly get kids that are great athletes who've never given any thought at all to being what Tip football could be, are suddenly making Tip football the talk of Southwest Ohio.
And this is really important to remember, is that these kids are under a lot of pressure, self-imposed, to do this under the gun when games are hinging virtually on every play. And if you had asked me before last weekend which teams will come out of the weekend, I would have been most certain, of course, about Marion Local. I would have been most certain in the second spot of Milton Union. And Milton has 18 returning starters. They're playing a team in Valley View they'd beaten before. They beat them at Valley View in the regular season. Of quite a contrast. Milton has 18 returning starters. Tip has only 3 returning starters. It just goes to show you nothing's guaranteed in the postseason. I know Brett Pierce and the Bulldogs are extremely disappointed. It'll take a long time to get over that loss to Valley View, but they had an unbelievable year. I really regret it for the Milton kids because I thought they were good enough to win a state championship. And on that one night where they had to be really on, they just had an off night.
No, and I wrote this in our what we saw last weekend featured earlier today. If I had to make that pick, and I had picked Milton Union on Friday night to win, if I had to pick that 4 more times, I would pick them to beat Valley View 3 out of the 4 times. It is inexplicable why teams get in that mindset or that happens to them where nothing goes right. And if you want an example at the top of the food chain, look what happened yesterday in Minneapolis when Dallas went there and absolutely made the Vikings look like fall practice scrimmage.
Yeah,
football. Yeah. And how can you explain that? I can't, except the fact that these are teenage boys. As you said to me earlier today, I think sometimes the more you think about it, the more that you think, I got one chance here, I dare not fail. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you try so hard not to lose, you make it impossible to win. And I think having seen them 3 or 4 times this year, if I had to pick that game 4 times, I'd pick them to win 3 out of 4 times. Not ashamed of that at all.
No, nor should you be. And it's really unfortunate because, you think of all those Milton kids who just had great careers, Blake Broomball, Michael Elam, on and on and on, Connor Brown. But they will be fondly remembered at Milton as they should be. They've won 2 straight TRCs. And it's got to be hard for them to watch Valley View play on Saturday night as Valley View moves on, and they'll be taking on Ironton, 14-0 Ironton. It's interesting as I scan the state semifinalists across all 7 divisions. We have 2 undefeated teams in Division 5, 2 of the 4. We have none in Division 1. These are teams that are left now. We have none in Division 3. We have none in Division 4. I said none in 1. And we'll move on to Division 6. Marion Local, of course, is undefeated. So is Kirtland. Those are 2 juggernauts bearing down on each other, which we'll get to momentarily. We do not have an undefeated team in Division 7, and we have 2 left in Division 4. So being undefeated doesn't guarantee you anything. Let's switch to Marion Local for a second, Sonny. And first, we want to thank our friends at Skynet Internet Services for making your appearance tonight. Hassle-free and hourglass spinning free as you have strong rural internet courtesy of the guys at Skynet.
Well, they're sitting here watching our show right now, and we could not do this without their loaning us the studio space. And again, as we talk about every week, call Skynet Rural Internet Service in downtown Piqua at 773-0998. Call Craig or Mike or Zach Grissom, and they will give you the same kind of attention and service that they've certainly given me at my home out in rural Covington. So they're servicing Miami, Shelby, Dark, Preble, Logan, Clark, Champaign, Auglaize, and even as far northwest as here is up in Mercer County. So again, the number to call is 937-773-0998. The Grissoms, give them a call. Greg Grissom's going to probably answer the phone for you, and you'll get that kind of personal service. Not only will he answer the call, but he may be the guy that shows up and assess your house and fix you up with just what you need. So it is Skynet Rural Internet Service in downtown Piqua, sponsors of the Monday Night Huddle Show on PressProsMagazine.com. Thank you, fellas.
Now, full disclosure, for those of you who are trying to weigh in with your questions on Facebook, we are taping tonight's show a little bit early, so we don't want you to think we're ignoring your questions. We just have some engagements tonight that preclude us, specifically Ohio State basketball is playing here at 9, so we're trying to get everything taken care of and do all the content that we normally do that you've come to expect, and you never pay for content on Press Pro, so hopefully you'll forgive us next week. We hope to be live on Monday night so we can take your questions, and we hope to be talking about New Bremen and Marion Local and Tip and Gahanna Lincoln and Springfield all moving on to the state championship round. But let's talk about what has been a season in which we always knew Division 6 would be the division most loaded across the board. We had the Division 6 state champion Cary returning. They got knocked out second week of the playoffs. We had Marion Local, of course, which was a walkover Division 7 champ a year ago. Kirtland, Division 5 runner-up, dropping down to Division 6. And Coldwater was in Division 6, and Coldwater, unfortunately, had the Marcel Blasingame injury. And I will always believe that Coldwater did not peak at the right time because of Marcel's injury, but they still had a tremendous year under Chip Otten. So now we have, in one semifinal, Marion Local playing Columbus Grove. Columbus Grove is 12-2. They barely survived Colonel Crawford in overtime, the team that knocked Cary out. But they will play on Saturday night, and that game will be played at Lima Senior, and you will be covering it. And Marion Local, I got my first look at them on Saturday night against Allen East. And I think you'd have had to be a cold-hearted soul, even more cold-hearted than if you'd have been out in that wind and snow without a coat on, not to feel sorry for Allen East, because they ran into a machine on Saturday night.
A juggernaut.
Wow.
A juggernaut. Yeah, that's the kind of, and you know, you're talking about now a team with 14 wins and 10 shutouts. And, you know, you mentioned we're taping this, and we can't address people's questions, but I do have one here that came in a little bit earlier this afternoon from Northeast Ohio, from somebody who's obviously got a Kirtland relationship. Says we can't wait for that matchup. What a great contest that will be if they get through there. Kirtland and Marion Local, who would be meeting, I think would be like the fourth time for a championship in either Division 6 or 5. I think that they've all been in Division 6 previously. But
that would be a Saturday morning.
People in Northeast Ohio are already looking forward to that matchup. And I would caution you, don't get the cart before the horse, because you got to beat Fort Fry this weekend. And I've seen Beverly Fort Fry before. They're a team that can put up a massive number of points. I know you've got a good defense up there. I know you've got shutouts. You don't have 10 like Marion does, but I also don't know if they play in a league like the MAC. So, this portends to be a great matchup. Should they get through Columbus Grove this weekend? Now, let me put this, and I don't have to tell anybody this from Marion Local. It hasn't been but about 15 years ago that Columbus Grove handed Marion one of their final losses, one of their 3 finals losses in a game that they got up in. I think that was probably the Division 6 championship back then. Big deficit in the first half, and Marion just simply ran them down in the second half and barely lost that game when they run out of time. So Columbus Grove has a great legacy of football up there. Physical team. I remember seeing them play Coldwater last year, and so that's going to be 2 years ago. Going to be a very good matchup in Lima Senior Stadium on Saturday night. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I don't know if Columbus Grove has changed its offense since that matchup in the Division 5 state championship game against Coldwater. They were very run-heavy with their quarterback, Bo Brungard, that night, and he was a tremendous player. That's one of the best high school football games you'll ever see, won by Coldwater on a last play field goal in overtime. And but Brungard ran it for 200 and some yards, and that was an amazing night with Miles Blasingame bringing Coldwater back time after time after time, including a late touchdown drive in regulation to force overtime. But Columbus Grove, one of its losses this year was to Allen East, 7-0. So I know the comparative score thing doesn't always hold.
No.
Looking at a team like Allen East that beat Columbus Grove 7-0, and Marion Local beat Allen East 55-0, I think it would be self-evident that Marion Local is a favorite to win this game. I'm sure Tim Goodwin and his staff will not like me telling that to his team, but I'm sure his players can look up scores online just as easily as I can. But the thing that impressed me about Marion Local Saturday night is not only the fact that they got their 7th shutout in 8 games, a period over which they've outscored their opponents by a collective margin of 356-3, but that they did it without playing Darren Meyer a single down. And Tim Goodwin after the game said Darren Meyer's probably our best player. Consequential running back. He's one of the leaders of their linebacking core, which is amazingly experienced and talented. And Darren Meyer had a shoulder injury from a very hard-hitting game against Versailles in round 3, and they expect Darren Meyer back against Columbus Grove on Saturday night.
I just remember that Columbus Grove is a team that, as far as physical intensity, will match up with anybody. That game, when you go back 2 years ago, and you were talking about the finals game with New Middletown, between New Middletown and Coldwater. But
so it was not Columbus Grove. It was New Middletown Springfield.
It was New Middletown Springfield. But that Columbus Grove team that they had to beat in the regional final or state semifinal to get there gave Coldwater everything that they wanted. And again, I mentioned the fact that you go back 15 years, and I think everybody remembers, I can't remember his name, but they had a great running back at that time at Columbus Grove that had a great game against Marion that day. And Marion almost came back in the second half and caught him at the end and just simply ran out of time. But that's going to be a great game on Saturday night. Looking forward to seeing that as well. But I'm going to tell you something. I haven't seen Fort Fry play this year. I saw him play. You and I saw him play last year when they played St. Henry. That's a team that's got that's got talent, and they can put points up. And we saw them run it, throw it, pull a couple of trick plays, rabbits out of the hat that particular day in 95-degree heat. So that's a community that's very proud of their football. They know what they're getting into, and that'll be a great matchup. The two semifinal games are going to be a matchup that's worth whatever they charge you to see it. I don't know, but those are going to be great games on Saturday night.
Yeah, and I was very impressed with in the conditions Saturday night. I mean, those conditions unnerved Fort Loramie in their loss to New Bremen, which we'll get to in a moment. Marion was very effective throwing the football. And Tate Hess can throw the ball, and Marion can throw the ball. And I think a lot of people thought all year long Marion can't throw it. Somebody will line up, a 9-man front and slow them down. That may yet prove true, but from what I saw on Saturday, we were surprised last year in the state championship game with Peyton Oddie at quarterback, and Newark Catholic shut them down the first series, and then Marion just decided, all right, you're going to crowd the line of scrimmage, we'll just throw it over your head. And they did it. Boom, 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 touchdown, and it was game over. And so I would caution teams who think Marion is all run. They will probably prove that to be a very faulty logic if, in fact, you go with that strategy.
Well, the thing, I go back to what the reference I just made at Tip City a few moments ago is the confidence factor. You can't get that. You can't teach that. You can't spoon feed that. You can't read a book and get it. When you've won 12 titles, when you've been in the title game 15 times and won 12 of 15, you're 75%. Their record in postseason play is such that they believe that whatever the coaches dictate, that this is how we're going to play on Saturday night this week and the following week, should they get through there. Those kids believe that they've been put in a position of success, of succeeding, and believing that you can do it is more than half the battle. And that goes back to what Matt Burbacher and Charlie and that staff at Tip have done this year, and certainly what Tim Goodwin's done now for 23 years.
So I don't know the history before my arrival at Press Pros 2 years ago, but we are on track, thanks to New Bremen's victory over Fort Loramie, to have another year, where we have two MAC teams play for and win state championships at this juncture. Last year, of course, Marion Local and Versailles. The year prior to that, it was New Bremen and Coldwater. Thank you. So they're still on track. And New Bremen would be one of the teams that, if you looked at the seeding of the 28 teams, let me see. We got 4 and 7 divisions of the 28 teams left. You'd look at the seedings and you'd say, well, Columbus Grove, Marion Local's opponent, was a 5 seed, tied for the 5 seed in its region. And New Bremen is a 5 seed in Region 28. And New Bremen had to work very hard to knock out the number 1 seed Ansonia 2 weeks ago at Greenville. They pulled that out on a late score in that game. But it was not a tight game against Fort Loramie. And certainly the conditions bothered Caleb Maurer and Fort Loramie throwing the football. But I was quite impressed with Spencer Wells, the Fort Loramie coach, who said, it wasn't the conditions that was the sole reason for our defeat. New Bremen just played better.
Well, but I think conditions do have a lot to do with it, because that was not. Again, you can compare that to what happened to Milton Union. It's inexplicable as to why a team that has shown the ability to beat anybody from Division III through Division VII, all comers from across the state of Ohio, as they play an independent schedule throughout the year. Nothing is tougher than getting on a bus and driving 3 hours to someplace, playing and driving 3 hours home. Fear of the unknown, fear of the unfamiliar, call it what you will. And they've handled that all year long, compiling an 8-2 regular season win. And then, of course, what they've done has been a very confidence building scenario in the playoffs. Now, to go out in the other night, is that team 24 points less than New Bremen? No. In fact, I think if they played 6 times, I would say 50-50. Given what we know about both teams. Caleb Maurer certainly is a playmaker quarterback. They've certainly got a running back there, and that Holland kid that can do their line play has been good this year. Defensively, they are a tough physical team, and certainly gave one of the big guns in the MAC, that being Versailles, all they wanted early in the season. And Logan Eilerman, I would put him up as a playmaking wide receiver against anybody I've seen this year at Fort Laramie. So I don't know what happened. You were there the other night. I didn't get to see it. Those conditions don't make it easy for sure. But I think too that when you get into those situations, sometimes, like you told me earlier today, sometimes that thought of if is this.
I said the fear of what you're about to accomplish weighs you down.
Fear of what you're about to accomplish. Thank you for putting for the words. Sometimes that it can be overwhelming. I think maybe that had something to do with Milton Union, as we talked about earlier today. But I'm telling you right now that New Bremen is not on a night-for-night basis 24 points better than what Fort Laramie is. And again, why you explain, nobody knows. It's interesting. Some of those kids at Milton Union particularly, I'll bring you up, Blake Broomball is not done playing football. He's obviously going to play college football someplace. And he'll have good days in college football, but he's never going to forget that night against Valley View the other night, regardless of what he accomplishes at the next level of football. That's how much these games right now, whether it's the regional semifinals or the regional finals or the state semifinals or the state final, means in the inventory of football for kids that have had that opportunity to play.
Yeah, and if you doubt that, LeBron James has a fistful of championship rings and MVPs and everything else, and he still talks about that loss to Roger Bacon in the state championship game when he was at Akron St. V. So the losses stick with you for a long, long time. Most coaches say they stick with you longer than the wins stick with you. But let's talk about New Bremen, because they were a team, and I'll credit you. You told me middle of the year, New Bremen's good enough to win Division VII. And, not a disgrace losing to Marion Local. It's not a disgrace losing to Coldwater. They scored 16 points against Marion Local. Nobody else has scored more than 7. So they got something going on offensively with Hunter Schaefer and David Homan. And then they had the puzzling loss, final regular season game to Delphus. And I don't know that we've ever gotten a definitive. Did David Homan play? Did Hunter Schaefer play?
Okay. He had a bruise. He had a foot injury or a bruise or something like that, and they just set him out as a precaution. And so he didn't play. Set him out. He gets a week's extra time to rest and recuperate, and he's come back with no ill effects since then. So, 7-3 team. And I mentioned somebody last week about 7-3 teams and haven't fared well in the 16-team regions, and somebody immediately said, well, New Bremen is a 7-3 team. Yeah, they're not the average 7-3 team that comes out of, and I think they were a 4th or 5th seed in
number
region
5,
number 5's in region 28. So I'm talking about 7-3 teams that were 8th and 9th seeds in some of the regions across the state that are listening to us tonight instead of prepping to play this weekend.
Yeah, so I like their chances against Lima Central Catholic. Lima Central Catholic's a 10-4 team. Again, with the comparative scores, Lima Central Catholic lost to Fort Laramie by 1 point. So does that mean New Bremen is 23 points better than Lima Central Catholic? Absolutely not. It'll be a struggle, I think, for New Bremen to beat them. I expect a 4-quarter game, but I do not doubt New Bremen's ability to win that game because New Bremen has a championship mindset, having won the championship 2 years ago. And once you win it, and once you know you can do it, you know what it takes, and you know you can do it. And that's why I like Chris Schmidt's team's chances against Lima Central Catholic.
Well, going back to the statement about why Fort Laramie, what happened to them on Saturday night, I don't know. You don't know. Nobody, I'm sure only they know. But I actually said as early as week 4 this year that one of those two teams in Division 7, Region 28, either New Bremen or Fort Laramie, would be in the state championship game.
You did say that. Yep.
And I wrote about that as far back as 12 weeks ago. And so here we are in week 15 now. And, as it turned out to be, it's New Bremen who's still playing for the opportunity to get there. But that's how highly I thought of Fort Laramie and the job Spencer Wells and his coaches did. That's how much I thought about Caleb Maurer and Holland and Logan Eilerman and some of the other players they had. And they have played through some injury. They've had a couple of their studs there this year who have been out with knees and ankles and things like that. So they haven't been 100% throughout the year, and that happens to everybody. But they have persevered. They played through it, and they got as far as they did the other night.
So that's our rundown on our high school games of note, and we will be covering, of course, Marion Local and Columbus Grove on Saturday night. Sonny's got that game. New Bremen and Lima Central Catholic. That'll be mine, I believe. That's at Harmon Field in Wapak. On Friday night, our Steve Blackledge will be covering Gahanna Lincoln against your defending state champion, Lakewood St. Ed. I'll be at London High School for Tippecanoe and Bloom Carroll. And do we have another game that night? I'm trying to think if we have another game that night. I don't think
we have Springfield Moeller.
Oh, we have Springfield and Moeller. That's right. I knew we had a third game, and you'll be there taking a look at Bryce Schondelmeyer and a bevy of Division I receivers, and Springfield trying to get back to the state championship game. And speaking of if St. Ed would knock out Gahanna and Springfield would take care of business, then we would have a rematch of the Division I title game. In Division 7, we could have a rematch of the 2021 title game because Warren JFK has been on top of the polls all year. They are playing Newark Catholic. So one of the teams that's played in the state championship game in Division 7 the last 2 years is going to be back in it this year because Newark Catholic lost to Marion Local last year, and the year before Warren JFK lost to New Bremen.
I don't know if this means anything at all, but I do know a number of people in Newark who have made the statement this year that loss that they suffered, and here's the word of the day, an ignominious loss.
Ignominious, yep.
Last year to Marion Local, and they thought they had prepped for Marion Local. They thought that they could go in and slow them down the run game. Maybe they did underestimate Marion's ability with Kyle Oddie at the time, or Peyton Oddie at the time, to throw the football the way they did. And they got blown out in the first half and never recovered in the second half, never made a run. But that has been serious motivation. And I know I've talked to people in Licking County, people from the Newark Catholic community who have said that has been a significant issue for them all year to get back and prove that they were a better football team than the one that got blown out last year by Marion Local. So to say that if those two teams get together in the state final game or in the semifinal game that you just talked about this weekend, where Warren JFK has to play Newark Catholic. Newark Catholic's got that in the back of their mind. They want to get back there and atone for what happened last year.
Speaking of teams that want to atone for last year, there's a couple teams getting together Saturday in Ohio Stadium at noon, and the one wearing the scarlet jerseys would love to atone for last year. I can't imagine that they would want to lose to Michigan 2 years in a row and blow a college football playoff berth in the process. I've not seen a line on it, but to me, this game between Ohio State, number
9 points.
9 points.
9 points.
Yeah, I would. Look, don't bet based on me. I would be comfortable betting that line if I'm an Ohio State fan because I tell all my buddies that nobody will slow their offense down. I think you have to score 40 to beat Ohio State. The way I watched Michigan fail to be able to run the ball on Saturday against Illinois, and Illinois is a really good defense, but still Michigan could not run the ball with Blake Corum injured, with Donovan Edwards out. Conversely, Ohio State, and I know Maryland's not Illinois, but Ohio State was down to what? It's number 3 or number 4 running back, and they had no problem running the ball against Maryland. In fact, won the game because of the way they ran the ball against Maryland. I think for Michigan to win the game on Saturday, Blake Corum is going to have to play. He's going to have to average 4 yards a carry. He's going to have to carry it 25 times or more. If he does that, Michigan could be in the game in the fourth quarter. Otherwise, I think Ohio State will get out early on them, score a couple touchdowns, and win the game going away. That is what I anticipate will happen.
What concerns me about Ohio State every year when they play Michigan is the way their offensive line plays. And we talked about this earlier today, and I made the statement then. I think you got to run the ball. I think you got to have a modicum of game control, clock control, being able to keep the ball out of the other team's hands. They haven't shown me this year that they're a dominant run team. As good as their running back stable is with Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson and now with Dallin Hayden, inexplicably, why couldn't they run the ball better than they did against Iowa? Why couldn't they run the ball better than they did against Penn State? Why didn't they run the ball better when they really needed to against Northwestern in that blustery day where they struggled to throw the ball? You're playing Northwestern, by the way, not the San Francisco football 49ers. And they inexplicably, again, to use that word, there are times when they just aren't physical at the point of attack. When it comes to moving teams out and running and establishing that 4, 5, 6 yards of run, clock control, that is mentally the toughest thing you can do as far as giving yourself an advantage in a game that you must win. And I think that's still going to have some bearing. It certainly cost them the game in Michigan last year, and that stuck in my mind, that the fact that they could not move them off the line of scrimmage and run the ball better than they did.
Yeah, well, I don't see an Aiden Hutchinson on the other side of the line of scrimmage for Michigan this year, and I just think Ohio State will throw it at will. They'll throw it to run it, and I think Michigan will have a hard time getting off the field, and that really wears a defense out. The J.J. McCarthy that I saw early in the season for Michigan was a dynamic playmaker who could make plays down the field in the passing game. Saturday, I watched him, and man, he missed guys who were open, and it's very crucial for any team that beats Ohio State or is going to have a hope of beating Ohio State to make the plays that are there to be made when they're there to be made. And Michigan cannot afford to leave plays on the field. Ohio State's good enough. They can be 3rd and 15, 3rd and 16, and they can get Cade Stover or Egbuka or Marvin Harrison or Julian Fleming open, because you got to worry about 2, 3, 4th option on offense. Michigan's not that dynamic offensively. It's pretty much Ronnie Bell out wide and Blake Corum running the football, and Schoonmaker at tight end if he's back. That's the other thing. Michigan is really banged up. I know Ohio State fans think that they're really banged up with Henderson and Mayan Williams hurt, but trust me.
And Jackson and Jigma.
Yeah. I mean, I've written him off since the beginning of the year because I just knew that groin was probably going to be a very difficult injury. I never saw the wisdom in playing him early in the year like they did. And I don't know if that screwed him up for the rest of the year or not. And that'll be an interesting situation. If they're not in a bowl game, if they're not in a playoff game, would C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Paris Johnson, would a bunch of Buckeyes sit out? Don't forget, a bunch of them sat out last year. Olave and Garrett Wilson sat out last year at the Rose Bowl, and both of them went in the first round. And that basically validates their choice to sit the game out. So for Ohio State, I anticipate Ohio State will win the game comfortably. I think they'll cover. And I just don't see Michigan having what they had a year ago, which was 2 running backs, Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum, who could run the football, and a defensive line that can put consistent pressure on Ohio State. I don't see that in Michigan this year.
Well, I have seen that for years, this game for years. I've seen Michigan be overwhelming underdogs and come back and play them tough as heck. And conversely, I've seen Ohio State pull it off, a few times back in the Dennis Franklin days, back in the Bo days, some of those games, you remember back the 10-year war or whatever they called it back then. Strange things happen in this game because it's so emotional. And I sometimes emotions get in front of and in the way of the very facts that you just expertly laid out there. Yeah, there's a lot of things that favor Ohio State here. There's people who say you're nuts because they can throw it, they can do it, they've got more athletes. They've got more depth. They've proven enough already this year that they have come back and won games late. What they did at Penn State, what they did in the second half against Iowa, certainly their ability to play without a passing game at all against Northwestern and win. All those things. Yeah, it's all on the table. But again, this is Michigan. Sometimes what's the gray matter between the years gets in the way of what you can do between the tackles. And I look, we'll be there. We'll see for ourselves on Saturday. It's a nutty day. You've done a bunch of them. It's a nutty day.
Indeed it is. And we're looking forward to it. And we're looking forward to next weekend, of course. And we know a lot of you are going to be making your way to Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium for the state football championship. So it's a good time to remind you that you could make the trip armed with a $50 gift card from Lehman's. Lehman's Hardware and Old Time General Store. They're the exclusive sponsors of the Lowdown, which runs on the site 3 or 4 times a week. Make sure you're building in an extra hour and a half to stop off and see what all the fuss is about. 4 miles off Route 30 on Kidron Road. You can't miss it. Build that in. It's a great place to get out and stretch your legs, particularly people who are coming from Shelby County, from Miami County, from Mercer County. It's a great place to stop. You're going to love the store. You're going to rave about it. And if you'd like to win that $50 gift card, get your entry into PressProsContest@gmail.com. PressProsContest@gmail.com. And when you stop by Lehman's, tell them that you came because Press Pros sent you there. They'll be happy to see you, and we'll be happy to introduce you to a one-of-a-kind retail experience at Lehman's Hardware and Old Time General Store.
Well, if you grow a garden and you like to garden like I do, and you've been there with me, I've never seen a place that had more gardening equipment and a collection of hose to be, and I mean the kind you kill weeds with.
Yes, so, HOES.
Yes, HOES, and even cast off left and right. So custom made at that. So they've got everything there, and I like my pocket knives as well. And they have the biggest collection of case pocket knives I have ever seen. Not only stainless steel, but carbon steel.
Yeah,
and anybody who knows their pocket knives know that nothing sharpens better or holds an edge like a carbon steel blade.
You chefs and you grillers, Lehman's selection of kitchenware and cast iron cookware and camping gear and their grill section and their stove section is, look, you're just never going to be able to fully grasp it unless you actually go. Build in time to eat. Their cafe is phenomenal. Their fudge is great. They have an amazing candy section and toy section for little kids. Whoever you're taking will find something that will captivate them at Lehman's Hardware and Old Time General Store. And Absolutely. With that, Mr. Fulks, anything you'd like to add before we wish everyone a good night and head over to watch Ohio State against San Diego State in the Maui Classic?
No, but I do want to thank people who were here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Our numbers have been great. Readership for Friday and Saturday night coverage that we do, and more people, are watching our first person, and of course the Monday Night Huddle. They write in comments. You guys are very kind with their compliments and the job that we do and our staff, and so we appreciate hearing from you, and certainly appreciate knowing that you're out there and looking forward to reading what we have to write and say about what we're going to see this weekend. So that makes the job a little bit easier, and we certainly appreciate having you.
We do. And with that, everybody have a great rest of your Monday. We'll see you at the games this weekend, and we wish all your teams well. And remember, content is always free at PressProsMagazine.com.
Good night, everyone.